The morning had barely broken over the city. Sunlight struggled to pierce through the thick haze that hung over the sprawling metropolis, and the air still carried the crisp chill of the night that had just passed. In the outskirts of the city, where the paved roads gave way to broken pathways and potholes, where garbage heaps emitted their foul stench into the atmosphere, a different world existed, one that the glossy government reports and sanitized official tours never captured. Ibrahim Traoré, the president of the nation, stood beside a weathered wooden daba, setting up a modest tea cart. He wore simple, worn clothes, a faded shirt, loose trousers, and an old apron that had seen better days. His hands, usually adorned with the trappings of power, now arranged teacups and kettles with the practiced ease of a street vendor. He held a cup of tea in his hands, inhaling its aroma deeply, as if testing the authenticity of his decision to embark on this extraordinary journey. Within moments, the neighborhood began to stir with life. The daily struggle for survival commenced as laborers trudged past with their tools slung over tired shoulders. Street vendors pushed their heavy carts, sweat already beading on their foreheads despite the early hour. A few students with torn, threadbare bags made their way toward distant schools, their young faces already marked by the hardships of poverty. Soon, a couple of laborers approached Ibrahim's tea stall and sat down on the rough wooden bench nearby. One of them, his voice heavy with exhaustion, spoke up. "Brother, give me a cup of tea. Let the day at least start on a better note." Ibrahim smiled gently and poured a steaming cup, placing it before the man. The laborer drank half the cup in one long gulp, then let out a deep sigh. After a moment of silence, he spoke again, his voice laden with disappointment. "There wasn't even bread for dinner last night. I thought if I get my wages today, maybe by evening we can arrange something. But this body is exhausted. Still, this one cup of tea is enough to give some comfort to my stomach." The second laborer immediately chimed in, his frustration evident. "And on top of that, this inflation. Less work, more hunger. Last week my daughter fell sick. Instead of spending money on medicine, I borrowed money to buy food. Now I'm wondering where I'll get the money for her treatment." Ibrahim sat silently, listening to their conversation. A pain settled deep in his chest. He couldn't help but ask, "Doesn't the government provide any assistance?" The laborer laughed, not with joy, but with bitter sarcasm. "Assistance, brother? That's only on paper. In reality, it's hard enough for us to fill our own stomachs with our blood and sweat. The rulers don't care about us." The fragrance of tea mixed with a bitterness that seemed to permeate the very air. Another man who had just sat down spoke softly. "If the rulers could see our condition with their own eyes, they might die of shame. But where do they look? Their cars, their palaces, their slogans. All of these are far removed from our suffering." The teacup trembled in Ibrahim's hand. These words struck directly at his heart. He knew these people were speaking the truth. His very being was crying out that reality never reached those in power. They only heard about decisions from above, but on the ground, everything was upside down. Just then, a small boy, perhaps 12 or 13 years old, approached hesitantly. His clothes were dirty, his shoes torn. He spoke with embarrassment. "Uncle, please give me a cup of tea." "But I don't have money right now. I'll pay you tomorrow when I get my wages. Please, I beg you." Without hesitation, Ibrahim filled a cup and placed it before the boy. The child's eyes lit up. As he took a sip, peace seemed to wash over his face. He whispered softly, "May Allah keep you happy. After spending the whole night on an empty stomach, even this tea feels like heaven." Ibrahim lowered his head. The truth he had only seen in reports was now crystal clear before his eyes. The laborer's words echoed in his ears. If the rulers could see our condition. This journey had become even more profound because turning away from these realities was no longer possible. The afternoon sun had grown fierce. Dust from the alley rose in the air, settling in layers on everything. By now, several laborers, street vendors, and passers-by had come to Ibrahim's tea cart. Sitting beside his small stall, he carefully observed each face. These faces were covered in dust and sweat, but they all displayed the same things: exhaustion and hunger. At that moment, a helpless-looking woman approached with two small children. Both children could barely walk on their thin, weak legs. They held old iron cups in their hands. The woman hesitated near the cart and spoke in a moderate voice. "Brother, give me a cup of tea, but if possible, please give it on credit." "The children haven't had anything since morning." Ibrahim looked at her in surprise. Embarrassment was written all over the woman's face. Her eyes held such emptiness, as if she had been crying inside for many days. The children clutched their mother's shawl, staring at the tea kettle with questioning eyes. Ibrahim immediately filled a cup and handed it to her. "Please drink it. Don't worry about the money." The woman's lips trembled. Taking the cup, she said, "May Allah bless you. People here usually don't give credit. They say first pay money, then take tea. I haven't had a single coin for the past 2 days. My husband is sick. He can't work as a laborer. Since morning, I've only given the children water to drink." Words stuck in Ibrahim's throat. He looked at the children who were reaching eagerly for the cup. The mother held the cup and gave each child sips. For a moment, a wave of relief passed over the children's faces. But that relief was fleeting. A laborer sitting nearby spoke in a voice filled with sorrow. "This is the reality, brother. Yesterday I saw this woman go to get rations and the shopkeeper said, 'First pay the old dues.' People are helpless. Hunger is a cruel thing." The woman spoke in a soft voice with lowered eyes. "We think every day that tomorrow will be better, but tomorrow never comes. Only hunger increases and hope diminishes." Ibrahim took a deep breath. He knew that the pain of hunger could never be written on paper. It only reflects in those eyes that see children asking for bread when the mother has nothing to give. He spoke in a gentle tone. "Doesn't any organization help you? Any government arrangement?" A bitter smile appeared on the woman's lips. "Organizations? They also ask for money. Sometimes under the pretext of filling forms, sometimes in the name of moving files forward. If we had money, why would we knock on their doors?" These words struck Ibrahim's heart like arrows. He felt as if the entire weight of his office had fallen on his shoulders. The pain of the common people was not hidden in words, but in reality. The woman placed the empty cup back and walked away with her children, her eyes lowered. Her steps were staggering, but she continued with composure. The children kept looking back at the cart, as if wanting to smell the aroma of tea once more. Ibrahim watched their departing steps for a long time. Only one voice echoed in his heart. "This problem is not just about food. This is the hunger of a system that is devouring the poor alive." As afternoon turned to evening, the heat intensified. The sun beat down on the mud walls of the neighborhood's crude houses like fire. Ibrahim stood near his cart when he suddenly heard shouting. Some distance away, women and children stood in line with iron buckets and plastic containers. Their clothes soaked with sweat, lips dried from thirst, faces scorched by the sun. All together they created a strange spectacle. Ibrahim asked a laborer sitting nearby, "Why are these people standing here?" The laborer, wiping his forehead with a cloth, replied, "They get water from here." "But brother, this is no easy task. You have to stand in line for hours. Even then, you don't get clean water. And the officials here won't open the tap without taking money." Ibrahim asked in surprise, "But water should be provided free by the government, shouldn't it?" A bitter laugh escaped the laborer's lips. "On paper, everything is free, but in reality, everything is sold. Whoever pays gets a full bucket, and whoever can't pay goes home with dirty water. Just yesterday, my neighbor's child got fever from that water." Ibrahim's feet automatically moved toward the crowd. Women were arguing. Children were screaming. One woman raised her empty bucket and shouted, "We stand in the sun all day. Even then, if you don't pay money, you don't get water. What kind of justice is this?" A young man standing nearby said, "All this goes into the pockets of the officials. There's no information reaching the top. Or perhaps everyone knows but sits with closed eyes. Allah will question everyone." Suddenly, a child on the right side dragging his pot fell down. His knees were scraped. But still crying, he picked up the pot and stood up. His lips were turning white from thirst. Ibrahim's heart ached. He moved forward, bent down, and asked the child, "Son, how long have you been waiting for water?" The child said with tear-filled eyes, "Since morning. Mother told me to go early, but I haven't gotten anything yet." People are saying we won't get water until we pay money. We don't have money." Hearing this, Ibrahim's heart grew heavy. This problem was not just about hunger, but also about thirst. And this thirst was not just physical, but a thirst for justice. At that moment, a thin man spoke. "Yesterday I paid 500. Only then did they let me fill 2 containers. If I hadn't paid, the children would have slept thirsty all night. This is the state of our country, where even a blessing like water has to be purchased." Ibrahim stood lost in thought, wondering why all this didn't reach the top. He looked up at the sky. The sun was beginning to set. But the suffering and thirst spread across the ground would not hide in any night. Night's darkness had deepened. The city's alleys were submerged in semi-darkness, and on the streets, the same old lights burned dimly. Ibrahim, dressed in common clothes, slung his old bag over his shoulder and slowly walked toward the area where during the day there had been uproar over water. The air carried a mixture of moisture and smoke. Near garbage heaps, stray cats' eyes gleamed in the darkness. The entire atmosphere held an unusual silence, as if the city's wounds had hidden in the night's darkness. Reaching near the water tank, he hid and sat in the shadow of a crumbling wall. There was dim light there, and a few men stood silently. Within moments, 2 officials arrived. One had a register in his hand, and the other, carrying a large bunch of keys, moved toward the tap. Around them, a few people stood anxiously with their buckets and containers. A man stepped forward and pleaded with folded hands. "Sir, I've been standing since morning. Please give me some water." The official closed the register indifferently and growled, "Did you bring money?" "Nothing here is free." The man pulled out a few crumpled notes from his pocket with trembling hands. The official grunted, snatched the notes, and stuffed them in his pocket. Then he opened the tap, and murky water began to flow. People rushed to fill their containers. Ibrahim's heart sank. He observed carefully. A foul smell emanated from the water. It wasn't clean, but contaminated water from rusted pipes, full of debris. At that moment, a woman approached with her 2 children. She carried an empty iron pot. She spoke in a soft voice. "I don't have money. Please give just a little water for the children." The official said sarcastically, "Get away from here without money." "Don't mess up the line." The children began to cry. The woman pleaded, "I'll pay tomorrow. Just give a little today." The second official came forward. He roughly pushed the pot. The pot fell to the ground and broke. The woman screamed, and the children fell to the ground, trying to collect the few drops of water with their hands. A shiver ran through Ibrahim's body. He was recording all this on his mobile. But his heart wanted to go and stop everyone immediately. However, he remembered his purpose. He needed to bring the truth before everyone, not make an emotional move in a single moment. Nearby, a young boy stood with a bucket. When the tap opened, he tried to fill his bucket but got caught in the crowd, and his bucket fell and overturned on the ground. Sobbing, he picked up the empty bucket and started walking back. Ibrahim couldn't restrain himself. He quietly approached the boy and asked, "Son, where are you going?" The boy said in a tearful voice, "I'm going home. Mother told me to bring clean water, but I didn't have money. They said without money there's no water. Now I'm going back empty-handed." Ibrahim's eyes filled with tears. This scene fell on his heart like a stone. He felt as if the thirst of the entire nation had descended upon him in one moment. He sat there in the shadows all night long. He witnessed people's complaints, children's crying, and the officials' bribery with his own eyes. When the moon hid behind the clouds, Ibrahim had decided in his heart that this reality could no longer remain hidden. The morning had not yet fully broken when Ibrahim, carrying the entire burden of the previous night in his heart, headed toward a narrow alley. The atmosphere of the alley was oppressive. A mixed wave of gutter stench and dampness spread everywhere. On the walls, old writings and half-fallen posters told the story of poverty. At the door of a small house, a few shoes lay scattered haphazardly. Ibrahim knocked softly. The door opened and a thin, frail woman appeared. Dark circles surrounded her eyes and signs of exhaustion were evident on her face. She recognized him as the person who had been silently observing everything near the water tap last night. She simply said, "Come in, please come inside." Inside the room, a child lay on a broken cot. His breathing was labored, lips dry, and his eyes showed the redness of high fever. A clay pot nearby was empty. The mother spoke softly. "This is my son, Yusuf. He's been burning with high fever for 2 days. The doctor said to keep giving him water. But, sir, where do I get water from? What I got last night was dirty. It made his condition worse." Ibrahim's heart was struck. He went and sat near the cot. The child looked at him with half-closed eyes and barely moved his lips. "Mother, I'm thirsty." The mother looked at the pot in panic. Then in a trembling voice said, "Son, I'll bring it now." But tears began flowing from her eyes. Ibrahim immediately took out his bottle from his bag and held it to the child's lips. Yusuf tried to drink a few drops but lay back down from weakness. Ibrahim held the child's hand. It was burning like an ember. Ibrahim gently asked the mother, "Did you show him to a doctor again?" She spoke softly. "Sir, where do I get money from? What I had I gave to the water people yesterday. Nothing is left for the doctor's medicine." Hearing this, Ibrahim took a deep breath. The damp spots on the walls and the marks of water dripping from the ceiling all testified that this family was being crushed under the weight of poverty. Suddenly, Yusuf started shaking in a fit of coughing. The mother sat by his bedside in panic and began placing a wet cloth on his forehead. Ibrahim recorded all this on his mobile, but at the same time, he was lost in thought that this wasn't just recording. It was the cry of a nation. The mother said while crying, "Every day we're told to be patient. These are difficult times. But if my son dies, what should I be patient about? Water is like poison when we get it, and when we don't, life leaves us. What kind of justice is this?" Ibrahim spoke in a firm tone. "I won't let all this remain hidden. Your voice will reach everyone." The child opened his eyes again and gave a weak smile, whispering softly, "Uncle, when will clean water come?" No answer came to Ibrahim's tongue. He remained silent but decided in his heart that this question now belonged not to just one child, but to the entire nation in an old, dilapidated alley of the city, where yellowish lights created an even more mysterious atmosphere as evening fell. Ibrahim arrived in the guise of a tea seller. Walking into the alley, he immediately noticed that while a few shops were open, the activities inside were completely different from ordinary buying and selling. Sacks contained canisters, large containers, and plastic cans with labels for water and grain. But everything was being moved in and out with unusual secrecy. Ibrahim sat down at a corner with a small table and began serving tea to people from the kettle in front of him. Only a few moments had passed when 2 men bent forward and began whispering to each other. One said, "Brother, last time the goods arrived late." People started making noise. "Hurry now, or the higher-ups will also get wind of it." The other laughed and said quietly, "The higher-ups are also shareholders in this. There's no need to worry. As long as the money flows, everyone remains silent." Ibrahim placed a teacup near them and listened carefully. Within moments, a thin man entered and began asking, "How much are the water cans today?" The person sitting at the counter said arrogantly, "For common people, one costs 500, but for you, take 50 cans for 300 each or leave it." The man hesitated and said softly, "This is the same water that the government promises to give free." "Then why do you people charge money?" At this, a commotion broke out. The counter person said in a loud tone, "For those who dream of free things, there's nothing here. The government's water comes here, but we bring it. If you don't pay us, then go search in the Sahara." Ibrahim observed this scene carefully. On one side, a poor customer was counting money with trembling hands. On the other side, this merchant was selling water canisters at the price of gold. This black market was not just trade, but a stranglehold on the very breath of society. Ibrahim gently intervened. He spoke like an ordinary tea seller. "Sir, these people are in such difficulty, show some mercy." The counter person laughed sarcastically and said, "Tea seller, what do you know? This is our business. Mercy here is only for those who pay off the officials above. The rest of the public is only here to suffer." Hearing this, a storm arose inside Ibrahim. He understood that this entire network was connected all the way to the top. He quietly took out his mobile from his pocket and started video recording. Every conversation, every bargaining, every cry began to be preserved in his camera. At that moment, another person arrived. Dirt was falling from his clothes. Hunger and helplessness were clearly visible in his eyes. He spoke with folded hands. "There's been no water in my house for 3 days. The children are writhing with thirst. Give me some cans, I'll pay later." The counterperson stood up angrily and snapped, "Get out of here. This is not a charity house." Ibrahim had now decided in his heart that this abhorrent game must be brought before everyone. He knew that this truth, however bitter, was equally necessary. He got up from there and packed up his tea things, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. But a fire was burning in his eyes, a fire that would not be extinguished without igniting the entire nation. The next morning, Ibrahim stood outside a government office in the city. Sunlight was falling on the awnings, but the atmosphere inside was oppressive. A long queue had formed at the door. People were drenched in sweat, holding papers in their hands. Someone had come to fix an electricity bill. Someone was asking for a water connection. Someone was requesting assistance for medical treatment. From the outside, one might think this institution was for serving the people. But the story inside was completely different. Ibrahim entered in disguise. On the walls of the room hung framed pictures of leaders. But below them, an officer sitting behind a long desk was indifferently flipping through papers while leaning against a cushion. An old man standing before him repeatedly folded his hands and said, "Sir, there's no electricity in my village. Children study by candlelight. For God's sake, please approve our application." The officer said arrogantly, "If the application is to be approved, the fee is separate." "Nothing happens here without an offering," the old man said helplessly. "Sir, my pension itself is so small. Where do I give a bribe from?" The officer waved him away with his hand. Ibrahim, watching all this, moved forward. He adopted the polite tone of a tea seller before the officer and said, "Sir, does every work here require separate payment?" The officer said in a sarcastic manner, "Yes, brother, this is a government office, not a charity house. Whoever comes lightens their pocket before leaving. If you want work done, pay money or take the window route out." At that moment, a woman entered. She held a sick child in her lap. She spoke in a trembling voice. "Sir, I didn't get medicine at the hospital. The doctor said it will be available through government assistance. I need your signature." Without showing even a trace of pity for the child's condition, the officer said, "You'll get the signature, but it requires a 5,000 note. Otherwise, leave." Tears began flowing from the woman's eyes. She said, "I don't have that much money." "My child will die, sir," the officer said in a cold tone. "Then let him die." "Someone or other dies here every day. What do I care?" These words, hitting against the walls of the room, seemed to become a scream. Ibrahim's patience was beginning to overflow. He quietly took out his mobile and began recording the conversation. He was preserving every explicit statement. Ibrahim said in a subdued tone, "Sir, if you yourself take money like this, where will the poor go?" The officer said arrogantly, "This country is not for the poor. This is a means for filling our pockets. Whether the poor live or die, what difference does it make?" His words shook Ibrahim to the core. The helplessness of the people sitting outside and the arrogance of the officer inside were all one and the same spectacle. He understood that the problem was not just poverty or hunger, but corruption sitting at the roots of the system. Evening was falling. In a park in the center of the city, under the shade of trees, a few people sat gathered. The fragrance of grass was dissolving in the air, but faces bore the shadows of seriousness and pressure. Ibrahim wore the attire of a common man. He quietly went and sat near them. No one recognized him. A middle-aged man whose beard edges had turned white leaned forward and said, "This tyranny can no longer be tolerated. Children are dying for water. There's no medicine in hospitals, nothing to eat. And the people sitting above are only filling their pockets." Another young man, whose eyes were filled with anger, quickly said, "Enough is enough. We have to rise up. But the question is how? If we raise our voice, the police will immediately arrest us." The old man took a deep breath and said softly, "The police are also their slaves. If all the people unite, no power can stop us. But the fear is that the public is still scattered." Ibrahim silently assessed everyone. These were not just a few people, but the same fire was burning in their hearts that he himself had felt in recent days. A thin, frail woman, whose clothes bore the dirt of labor, said softly, "Yesterday in my neighborhood, children fainted from thirst. I saw with my own eyes that their parents were forced to pawn their utensils to buy water." "Is this life?" The young man clenched his fist and said, "If all the people take to the streets together, these people will be frightened. But we need someone who can guide us, who can convey our message to everyone." The old man spoke again. "Yes, without leadership, rebellion scatters. We need someone who understands our pain, someone who is living with us, not in palaces above." These words struck Ibrahim's heart like arrows. These people wanted real change, but they needed confidence and direction. The woman said in a soft voice, "We all know that there is wealth in the government treasury. But what comes to our share are only empty vessels. If this system doesn't change, our coming generations will also live in this humiliation." The young man said in a determined tone, "Then decide. Either remain silent or rebel." For a moment, everyone fell silent. Tension could be felt in the air. Ibrahim saw in everyone's eyes that glimmer that flickers in the sky before a big storm. Finally, the old man said softly, "This matter should not go beyond here. We all have to remain united. The whispers of rebellion will remain in hushed words for now, but this seed will sprout and become a tree in the coming days." Night had grown deep. In a small neighborhood of the city, Ibrahim sat as an ordinary tea seller near his stall. The light from a lantern, the flickering wind, and the sound of stray dogs wandering in the alley made the atmosphere even more desolate. But that night he carried a different burden in his heart. He knew that if the recordings made during the day in the black market and the conversations in the government office fell into someone's hands, all secrets would be revealed. At that moment, a thin boy, whom Ibrahim often saw coming for tea, approached with slow steps. He kept looking around and then whispered, "Brother, some people were talking about you. They're saying this new tea seller is not an ordinary man." Ibrahim looked at the boy in surprise and said in a low tone, "What were they saying?" The boy replied nervously, "This man is recording everything. He's sending information to the top. Some even said maybe he's a government spy." Ibrahim's heartbeat quickened. He knew that if this suspicion grew, his real purpose would be overshadowed. Breaking the silence, he said, "Look, this city is submerged in darkness. What I'm doing is only for people like you. But you must not tell anyone about this either." The boy hesitated, then said, "I understand. But there's fear in everyone's heart in the neighborhood. If someday the police raid, you'll be the first suspect." Another person sat down at the tea stall. He was a middle-aged man with sharp eyes. Picking up the cup, he said, "Tea seller. These days you go around with great interest here and there. Sometimes the black market, sometimes the government office. What are you looking for?" Ibrahim, bringing a slight smile to his face, said, "Sir, I go out daily for bread. Here and there, a tea seller has to go everywhere to stay alive." He cleared his throat, gave a deep look, and whispered, "But people think something else. They say your clothes don't smell like a laborer." "Your words don't reflect an uneducated man. There's some secret, isn't there?" Ibrahim lowered his eyes for a moment. Then he slowly poured tea into the cup and said, "Secrets only exist where there's no trust. I only know that the suffering you're enduring, I feel it too." The man said, "Understood," but doubt remained in his eyes. He finished the tea and got up, but while leaving said, "Be careful. This ground is very fragile. Anyone who looks even slightly different immediately becomes a target." For Ibrahim, this was a decisive moment. He firmly grasped his bag, the same bag that contained all the videos and evidence. It was afternoon. In the city's central square, a crowd of people had gathered. Everywhere, faces tired from sweat and the heat of the sun could be seen, but in their eyes was a light of restlessness. Some people stood holding open vessels in which dry sediment and dirty water were visible. Women stood holding children in their arms with a complaining demeanor. Young men shouted slogans in anger, but then suddenly fell silent as if waiting for guidance. Amidst this crowd, Ibrahim slowly moved forward in the guise of an ordinary tea seller. He had an old bag in his hand. He stood on a small platform and spoke in a loud voice. Brothers and sisters, today I will place before you what has been hidden from you for years." People looked at him in surprise. One person whispered, "This is the same tea seller who wanders everywhere. What has he come to say today?" Ibrahim opened the bag and held up his mobile phone. On the screen played the video in which black market shopkeepers were selling water canisters at gold prices. The crowd fell into silence. The same shopkeeper was saying arrogantly, "This is government water, but here it's only for those with money. The poor will get nothing." A wave of anger and surprise ran across people's faces. A woman said while crying, "This is the same water for which we pawned our utensils." Ibrahim played another clip. The government office official, smoking a cigarette, was saying mercilessly, "This country is not for the poor. Only money works here." Commotion arose in the crowd. Young men began shouting slogans, "Stop the tyranny! Clean water is our right!" Ibrahim raised his hand and silenced everyone, then said, "All this is not just happening to you. It's happening to the entire country. Your children writhe from hunger and thirst, and these people fill palaces with the wealth that belongs to you." An old man from the crowd stepped forward. In a trembling voice, he said, "Son, we've been enduring all this for years." But there was no one to raise a voice. "Why are you showing all this? Who are you?" Silence fell over Ibrahim's face for a moment. Then he took a deep breath and said, "I am one who cannot remain silent seeing your suffering. I changed this disguise to understand your reality closely. This pain is not just yours, but also mine. I am this country's president, Ibrahim Traoré. I have seen everything. Now there will be justice." A look of sudden confidence appeared on people's faces. A woman raised a slogan, "If this is true, then we will not remain silent." A young man said with clenched fists, "Now the time has come for all of us to unite and confront these oppressors." Ibrahim raised both hands toward the sky and said in a determined tone, "This struggle is not just for water. It's for justice. If we all unite, no power can keep us thirsty and hungry." A week later, it was the moment of sunset. The sky was immersed in red and golden colors, and a slight chill began spreading in the air. In the city's central square stood the same people who had been participating in protests and struggles for many days, tired faces but a light of new hope in their eyes. Children's innocent smiles, women's strength, and the reflection of men's determination were evident everywhere. Ibrahim stood at an elevated place. His clothes were covered with dust, but his voice had such resonance that it drew everyone toward him. He looked at the people and said, "Brothers and sisters, today we stand at a place where the decision is not just for us, but for coming generations. We saw how our resources were looted, our thirst was turned into commerce, and our children's future was pushed into darkness. The crowd responded together. We saw, we have stopped enduring." Ibrahim raised his hand, asking for silence. Then, in a gentle but firm tone, said, "This struggle was not just for complaints. It was a lesson. And today's biggest lesson is that if the people unite, no power can take away their rights." A young man said in a loud voice, "But Ibrahim, if this tyranny is repeated again?" Ibrahim looked at him and replied with a smile, "Then each one of you will be Ibrahim. Each one of you will stand up because silence in the face of tyranny is the greatest weakness. Promise that you will never remain silent because I stand behind all of you." People raised their hands and said in one voice, "We promise." A woman, lifting her child up, said, "We make this promise for our coming generations that we will never leave them thirsty, hungry, or helpless." Moisture had descended into Ibrahim's eyes. He had improved the entire system in 1 week. He had the black market people arrested, made water facilities available, helped increase the income of the poor, and suspended that government official. He said in a loud voice, "This land is ours. These resources are ours, and justice is our right. Today we have not just lifted the curtain, but laid a new foundation." An old man struck his stick on the ground with trembling hands and said, "Son, this is the first time we feel that we are not alone." "This is everyone's promise." Silence fell over the crowd. Only the sound of wind gusts could be heard. Then suddenly everyone together raised a slogan, "Justice is our right. Tyranny will end." Ibrahim looked up at the sky one last time and said, "Remember, no matter how deep the darkness, light is more powerful than it." Today we have proven that we are not dependent on darkness. We ourselves are lamps of light. The redness of sunset was now fading, but in the heart of every person present in the square, a ray of new dawn had awakened. This was not an ending, but a new beginning, and everyone resolved in their hearts, "Now we will never be silent spectators." The first rays of dawn painted the presidential palace in shades of amber and gold. Ibrahim stood at his office window, no longer dressed as a tea seller but in his formal attire, yet feeling more himself than he had in years. The weight of the past week sat heavily on his shoulders, but it was a weight he now understood, the burden of genuine responsibility. His chief of staff, Marcel, entered with a stack of documents. "Mr. President, the media is requesting a formal statement. The videos you released have gone viral across the nation and internationally. Every news channel, every newspaper, everyone wants to know more." Ibrahim turned from the window, his eyes tired but resolute. "Let them know I'll address the nation this evening. But first, Marcel, I want you to convene an emergency cabinet meeting. Every minister, every department head. No exceptions." Marcel hesitated. "Sir, some of them, they're implicated in what you've documented. They know what's coming." "Good," Ibrahim replied firmly. "Let them know. Fear is the beginning of accountability." Within 2 hours, the grand conference room of the presidential palace was filled. Ministers sat in their expensive suits, some fidgeting nervously, others maintaining facades of confidence. The tension in the room was palpable. Everyone had seen the videos, heard the testimonies, witnessed the public outcry. Ibrahim entered without ceremony and took his seat at the head of the table. He didn't open with pleasantries or formalities. Instead, he reached into a folder and pulled out a stack of printed photographs, screenshots from his recordings. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "these are your constituents. This woman," he held up a photo, "pawned her wedding jewelry to buy contaminated water for her dying son. This man worked 16-hour days and still couldn't afford medicine for his daughter. This child died of dehydration while government water tanks sat locked, waiting for bribes to be paid." He threw the photos onto the table, and they scattered like accusations across the polished wood. "And where were you?" "Where were we?" Ibrahim's voice rose. "Sitting in air-conditioned offices, signing papers that meant nothing, making policies that never reached the people they were meant to serve. Or worse, actively participating in their exploitation." The Minister of Water Resources, a portly man named Dominic, cleared his throat. "Mr. President, with respect, the issues you've highlighted are complex. There are systemic challenges that—" "Silence." Ibrahim's palm struck the table. "I lived as one of them. I drank their water or lack thereof. I saw children with my own eyes, not in reports, not in statistics, but real children, crying from thirst while officials you appointed demanded payment for what should be their birthright." The room fell into an uncomfortable hush. The finance minister, a woman named Amara who had served for over a decade, spoke carefully. "What you did, Mr. President, was courageous. But the backlash will be severe. There are power structures, international interests, legacy systems." "Then we dismantle them," Ibrahim interrupted. "Starting today. Starting with this room." He stood, pacing along the table's length. "Effective immediately, the Water Resources Minister is dismissed and will face criminal investigation. The Health Minister," he pointed to another stunned official, "you have 72 hours to present a working plan for free medical care in every impoverished district. Or you're next." His finger moved down the table. "Agriculture, education, infrastructure, each of you will undergo a complete audit. Your departments, your staff, your contractors. Every penny will be accounted for." The room erupted in protests, excuses, justifications. Ibrahim let them speak for a moment, then raised his hand. "I didn't ask for your opinions. This is not a negotiation. It's a reckoning. You have a choice. Be part of the solution or be removed. The people have awakened. They won't go back to sleep." While Ibrahim worked to reform his government, powerful forces began to mobilize against him. In a luxurious estate on the outskirts of the capital, a clandestine meeting was underway. General Kofi, the head of the military council, sat with several business magnates who had profited from the corrupt system for years. The industrialist Victor, who controlled much of the nation's water bottling and distribution, spoke first. This crusading president of ours has become a problem. The black market we controlled, gone. The bribes that kept contracts flowing, exposed. He's destroying decades of carefully built infrastructure. Another businessman, Hassan, who owned chains of private hospitals, added, "My sources tell me he's planning to nationalize basic healthcare services. Do you understand what that means? Billions in lost revenue." General Kofi leaned back, his decorated uniform gleaming in the chandelier light. The military respects strength. What Ibrahim did, walking among the people, exposing corruption, it's gained him popularity. But popularity is fragile. It can be redirected. "What are you suggesting?" Victor asked, though his tone indicated he already knew. "We plant seeds of doubt," the general explained. "Start rumors that his exposé was staged, that the videos were edited, that he's using the poor as political pawns. We have media outlets, influential voices. We paint him as a populist demagogue who's destabilizing the country." Hassan nodded slowly. "And if that doesn't work?" The general's eyes hardened. "Then we remind everyone that governments can be transitional." Back at the presidential palace, Ibrahim's intelligence chief, a sharp-eyed woman named Fatima, brought him disturbing news. "Sir, we've intercepted communications. There's organized opposition forming. Military leadership, business interests, even some foreign entities who benefit from our instability. They're planning a propaganda campaign, possibly more." Ibrahim didn't seem surprised. "I expected this. You don't tear down a corrupt system without those who profited from it fighting back. What's their angle?" "They're questioning the authenticity of your videos, claiming you orchestrated the entire thing for political gain. They're finding people willing to say they were paid actors." Ibrahim smiled grimly. "Paid actors? The people who were dying of thirst, whose children were sick, they think the public will believe they were acting?" "Some will," Fatima said honestly. "People believe what they want to believe, especially when it's repeated often enough by trusted sources. Then we don't fight propaganda with propaganda," Ibrahim decided. "We fight it with more truth. Fatima, I want you to organize a people's assembly. Not in the palace, not in government buildings, in the neighborhoods where I worked. Let the people speak for themselves." 3 days later, in the same dusty square where Ibrahim had first revealed his identity, a massive gathering took place. This time, it wasn't just the poor and desperate. Journalists had come from across the nation and the world. News cameras pointed at a simple stage where ordinary citizens were given microphones. The first to speak was the laborer Ibrahim had met on his very first morning as a tea seller. His voice shook with emotion. "They say we were actors, that our suffering was fake. Let me tell you about acting. I've been acting my whole life, acting like I wasn't hungry, acting like my children crying for food didn't break my heart, acting like I had hope when there was none. The only thing that wasn't an act was our president's courage to see the truth." The crowd erupted in applause. Cameras captured every moment. Next came the woman whose child Yusuf had been sick with fever. She carried medical records, holding them up for all to see. "My son nearly died. These are his hospital papers, not fake, not staged. And this," she pulled out an old receipt, "is the bill from the black market where I was forced to buy dirty water at criminal prices. If this was acting, tell me what my payment was. Because all I got was a suffering child and a debt I'm still paying." One after another, people came forward. The boy who had been knocked down while trying to get water. The old man who had been refused help at the government office. Shop owners who had been forced to pay bribes. Teachers whose schools had no running water. In his estate, watching the broadcast, Victor threw his glass against the wall. "This is disaster. He's turned them into witnesses, into weapons." General Kofi watched with a military strategist's eye. "He's smart. He knew we'd attack his credibility, so he made the people his shield. We can't discredit thousands of witnesses without appearing monstrous." Hassan paced nervously. "So what do we do? Just accept defeat?" "No," the general said quietly. "We change tactics. If we can't discredit the message, we target the messenger differently. We make him seem dangerous, a revolutionary who's destabilizing the country, threatening economic collapse, inviting chaos. Within days, Coordinated articles began appearing in business journals and financial news outlets. Traoré's reforms threaten economic stability, read one headline. Foreign investors flee as president attacks business sector, claimed another. The stock market, influenced by whispers and coordinated selling, began to dip. The national currency weakened slightly. Business associations issued statements expressing concern about the investment climate. In an emergency economic briefing, the central bank governor, an elderly man named Emmanuel, presented grim projections. Mr. President, if this continues, we could face serious economic challenges. The business community is genuinely frightened. Of what? Ibrahim challenged. Of having to pay workers fairly? Of not being able to exploit basic human needs for profit? Let them be frightened. The people have been frightened for generations. But, sir, Emmanuel insisted, economic collapse won't help the poor. It will hurt them most of all. Ibrahim paused, considering. You're right, Emmanuel. Which is why we won't collapse. We'll transform. I want you to work with the finance minister, the new one, on an emergency economic plan. We're going to show that a just economy isn't just morally right, it's economically superior. Over the following weeks, Ibrahim's administration moved with unprecedented speed. They didn't just arrest corrupt officials. They seized illegally obtained assets and redirected them toward public services. Water infrastructure was rebuilt using confiscated funds from those who had profited from its deterioration. Free health clinics were established using equipment and supplies purchased with recovered bribe money. The government negotiated directly with farmers to cut out exploitative middlemen, lowering food prices while actually paying farmers more. But the most revolutionary move came when Ibrahim addressed the nation about the economy. My fellow citizens, he began, speaking from a simple podium rather than the ornate presidential office. We are told that justice and prosperity are opposing forces, that to help the poor we must impoverish the nation. This is a lie designed to maintain systems of exploitation. He held up a document. This is the national budget. For years it has been treated as a secret, something ordinary people couldn't understand. No more. Starting today, every citizen can access every line item of how their government spends their money. Transparency isn't radical, it's democratic. Behind the scenes, his economic team had been working with progressive economists and international NGOs to develop a model. They showed how investing in the poor, giving them clean water, healthcare, education, didn't drain the economy but fueled it. Healthy, educated workers were more productive. Ending bribery reduced business costs. Fair wages increased consumer spending. The initial market panic began to stabilize as investors realized the reforms weren't chaos, but calculated restructuring. Some foreign businesses left, but others, those interested in genuine sustainable development, began to show interest. It was a humid evening 3 weeks into the reforms. Ibrahim was visiting another impoverished neighborhood, this time not in disguise but as president, walking among the people, listening to their continued concerns and celebrating improvements. Children ran alongside his modest motorcade. He had rejected the bulletproof vehicles and excessive security, insisting on remaining accessible. His security chief, Captain Osei, had protested, but Ibrahim was adamant. If I hide behind walls and guns, I'm no different than before. The people need to see that their leader stands with them, not above them. As Ibrahim stopped at a newly built water distribution point, testing the clean water himself and sharing cups with residents, a shot rang out. The bullet missed Ibrahim by inches, striking the wall behind him. In the chaos that followed, security personnel swarmed, pushing Ibrahim to the ground and forming a protective barrier. Captain Osei tackled a figure on a nearby rooftop, a young man, barely 20, with a rifle. In the presidential palace an hour later, Ibrahim sat calmly while his security team raged around him. This is exactly what we warned about, Captain Osei shouted, his usual composure shattered. You make yourself a target and someone will take the shot. Did they catch the shooter? Ibrahim asked quietly. Yes, sir. He's in custody. Preliminary interrogation suggests he was hired, though he's not talking about who paid him. I want to speak with him, Ibrahim said, standing up. Absolutely not, his chief of staff Marcel interjected. Sir, he just tried to kill you. And I want to know why. Not why someone paid him, but why he agreed to do it. "Bring him to me." An hour later, in a secure room, Ibrahim sat across from the young would-be assassin. The young man, whose name was Joseph, looked terrified now that the adrenaline had faded and he realized he'd shot at the president. "Joseph," Ibrahim began, his voice surprisingly gentle, "I'm not here to interrogate you. My people will do that. I want to understand. Why did you agree to kill me?" Joseph stared at the floor, refusing to meet Ibrahim's eyes. "Was it money?" Ibrahim continued. "Did they pay you well?" Finally, Joseph spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "They paid enough to save my sister. She needs surgery. I had no other choice." Ibrahim felt a familiar pain in his chest, the same ache he'd felt 1,000 times during his week among the people. "Your sister. What's wrong with her?" "Kidney failure. The surgery cost more than I could earn in 5 years. They offered me enough to save her life, so I took the shot." Ibrahim closed his eyes. Even his would-be assassin was a victim of the system he was trying to fix. "Joseph, look at me." The young man slowly raised his eyes. "You will face justice for what you tried to do. But your sister will get her surgery, paid for by the government, not because of what you did, but despite it. Because that's the country we're building, one where people don't have to become murderers to save their loved ones." Tears streamed down Joseph's face. "Why? Why would you help her after what I tried to do?" "Because punishing you doesn't fix what made you desperate enough to try. And because your sister is innocent. The guilty parties are the ones who exploited your desperation and put a rifle in your hands." The interrogation of Joseph, combined with intelligence work by Fatima's team, began to unravel the conspiracy. Through meticulous investigation, they traced the money that paid Joseph back through several shell companies, eventually leading to accounts controlled by a consortium of business interests. Ibrahim called another emergency meeting, this time including the media and international observers. 3 days ago, someone attempted to assassinate me, he began, his voice steady. The young man who pulled the trigger is in custody, and he will face trial. But he is not the true criminal in this story. He was a desperate man, driven to terrible acts by a medical system that ransomed his sister's life. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The real criminals are those who paid him, who weaponized his desperation. And today, we are issuing arrest warrants for these individuals. Names flashed on the screen behind him. Victor, the water industry magnate. Hassan, the hospital chain owner. Others from the business elite who had profited from the old system and now sought to violently preserve it. These men, and others who will be named as the investigation continues, conspired to murder your president because his reforms threatened their profits. They valued their wealth over your lives, over democracy itself. The fallout was immediate and dramatic. Some of the named conspirators fled the country. Others were arrested at airports as they tried to leave. A few went into hiding. But the message was clear. The old guard was falling. General Kofi, watching from his military headquarters, realized that the tide had turned decisively. The assassination attempt, rather than weakening Ibrahim, had transformed him into a martyr president who had literally taken a bullet, or nearly, for his principles. Trying to remove him now would trigger a popular uprising. The general made a calculated decision. In a private meeting with Ibrahim, he pledged the military's full support for the reforms, effectively abandoning his co-conspirators. "You understand this is pragmatism, not principle," he told Ibrahim bluntly. "The people are with you." "The military follows the people's will, eventually." "I'll take pragmatic support over principled opposition," Ibrahim replied. "But understand this, General. The military will also be reformed. Your budget will be transparent. Your procurement processes will be audited. No institution is above accountability." The general nodded stiffly. He didn't like it, but he was a survivor. And survival meant adapting to the new reality. The seasons had changed, and so had the nation. It wasn't a transformation completed. That would take years, perhaps generations. But the trajectory had shifted undeniably. In the neighborhood where Ibrahim had first set up his tea stall, now stood a modern water distribution center. Clean water flowed freely, its quality monitored by citizen committees and government inspectors who reported directly to the public. The clinic where young Yusuf had nearly died was now a fully staffed health center, offering free basic care. Yusuf himself, healthy now, attended school regularly, a school that had been rebuilt with proper sanitation, clean water, and supplies. The old woman who had pawned her possessions for water now ran a small cooperative business, supported by microloans from a reformed banking system designed to help the poor build wealth rather than trap them in debt. But Ibrahim knew better than to rest on these victories. Every success revealed new challenges. Corruption, though diminished, hadn't been eliminated. It had just become more careful. International pressures continued as foreign interests adjusted to a government that prioritized its people over corporate profits. And there were still neighborhoods he hadn't reached, people still suffering, systems still broken. On the 6-month anniversary of his revelation, Ibrahim returned to the central square, not for a celebration, but for accountability. He stood before thousands, no longer as a disguised tea seller or even as a distant president, but as a leader who had walked in their shoes. 6 months ago, I stood here and showed you the truth of your suffering. I made promises. Today, I'm here to account for those promises. For the next 2 hours, he presented detailed reports, not in political rhetoric, but in concrete numbers and real stories. How many households now had clean water? How many children had received medical care? How many corrupt officials had been prosecuted? But also, where they had failed, where progress was slower than hoped, where new problems had emerged. I will not lie to you and say everything is fixed, he stated plainly. It's not. We've made real progress, but we have miles to go. What I can promise is this: I will never stop seeing you, never stop listening, and never return to the palace isolation that blinds leaders to their people's reality. A voice from the crowd called out, "Will you go undercover again?" Ibrahim smiled. I don't need to, because now every minister, every official knows that I might. They know I'm willing to see for myself. That possibility, that accountability, that's the real change. It's not about one president disguised as a tea seller. It's about a government that knows it serves the people, not rules them. Years would pass. Ibrahim's presidency would end, as all presidencies must in a democracy. But the change he initiated would prove more lasting than any single leader. The Traoré transparency laws became a model studied in universities worldwide, a framework for how governments could serve rather than exploit their people. The citizen committees he established to monitor public services became permanent institutions, giving ordinary people real power over the systems meant to serve them. Most importantly, the culture shifted. A generation of young people grew up with the story of a president who disguised himself as a tea seller, who risked his life to expose corruption, who proved that leadership meant service. When aspiring leaders spoke of their ambitions, they were asked, "But would you sell tea in the slums? Would you drink the water your poorest citizens drink? Would you live as they live?" The question became a test, a challenge, a reminder that authority without empathy was tyranny with a gentler name. In a small house in the neighborhood where it all began, an old laborer, the same one who had bought tea on that first morning, sat with his grandchildren, telling them the story for the 100th time. And then, he said, his eyes still bright with wonder despite his years, the tea seller revealed he was the president. Can you imagine? The most powerful man in the country, serving us tea, listening to our problems like we mattered. But grandfather, one of the children asked, why did he have to pretend? Why couldn't he just fix things from the palace? The old man smiled at the wisdom of the young. Because, my child, from the palace you see reports and numbers. You see problems as abstractions. But as a tea seller, he saw me. He saw your grandmother. He saw people, not statistics. And once you truly see someone suffering, you can't unsee it. That's why he had to pretend to be one of us, to remember that he was one of us. The child pondered this, then asked, could anyone do that? Could I? That, the old man said, pulling the child close, is the whole point. We don't need perfect leaders. We need leaders who remember they're human, who remember we're all in this together. Promise me you'll never forget that no matter who you become. I promise. Grandfather. And in promises like that, in stories told and retold, in the memory of a president who sold tea to save a nation, the real transformation continued, not in palaces or parliaments, but in the hearts of people who learned that power must be wed to compassion, that justice requires witnessing, and that sometimes the greatest leaders are those willing to set aside their crowns and simply see. The end a story of courage, justice, and the power of unity, where a president disguised himself to understand his people's suffering and transformed a nation through truth and determination. The greatest reforms are not written in laws alone, but in the changed hearts of both leaders and citizens who refuse to accept that poverty and suffering are inevitable.